Let's now get into our major conversation for tonight, and which is about the 2023 general election and what the Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC, has said. IPAC, in its meeting in Abuja, said that there is a need for a thorough review, a post-mortem of that election, and to look into details of what really happened and what went under. And they are asking that these thorough review of the process need to be done to allow all stakeholders know what really happened and how to correct them. And this will not be in prejudice of the tribunal that is ongoing.
The Council is reconstituting the Alternative Dispute Resolution Committee, which is ADRC, in line with the provisions of the IPAC Code of Conduct. This is to enable the political class to employ necessary in-house mechanisms to solve issues of disagreement amicably using political solutions. This will not only enhance the stability of the polity, but checkmate the onslaught of misguided politicians who are destabilizing the polity for their narrow, selfish interest. Also, ADRC will, among other things, reduce or eliminate the high cost of litigation and enmity amongst the political class.
That is the national chairman of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, Alhaji Yabaji Sani. Let's get some perspective into it. If you were one of those who expected a lot from INEC, based on the promises INEC made, perhaps you need to understand tonight the perspectives that my guests are going to bring to bear on what really happened, the need for a post-mortem. There is a case in court where petitions INEC is facing, and those who won the election are facing those challenges in the courtroom. But again, there is a need to, if there are stakeholders who, before the election, sat together and devised the means to conduct the election, if had anything that went wrong, shouldn't there be any kind of review of the process? That's the reason why we're going to be having this conversation for future election purposes. I'm being joined by the Executive Director of YAGA Africa, a lawyer, right activist, and election observer, Mr. Samson Itodo. Thank you so much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Good evening.
And also, let's get a benefit and knowledge, insight from someone who is who has a lot of institutional understanding of INEC and his workings. Dr. Mustafa Lekki, he joins us from the United States. He was a former national commissioner with INEC. Thank you so much, Doc, for joining us tonight, and it's good to see you. Let's begin the conversation. Samson, you're one of those who prepared a lot. Perhaps you're one of those who expected a lot based on what INEC promised. Let's begin first and foremost. I mean, you've said a lot about the outcome of this election. How disappointed are you, or what are your views about the outcome of the election? Let's begin from there.
I think our views are highlighted in the report that YAGA Africa released on the elections, and it's to the effect that the 2023 elections were a missed opportunity, and a missed opportunity to consolidate on some of the gains that we recorded in the journey to 2023. The 2023 election is perhaps one of the most meticulously planned general election since 2011. It was an election that was regulated by a new legal framework that provided INEC with the opportunity to deploy technology in the electoral process, but also early funding for the elections. And we could see that it was a legal framework that gave INEC a lot of powers, enormous powers, you know, to manage elections. So if you were looking for, you know, an independent National Electoral Commission vested with powers, you know, to review results declared under duress or results declared in contravention of extant laws, this was the INEC. But if you look through this, and I think it's important as we look at this review, that we need to consider that election is a composite of several activities implemented within a long period of time. So you have pre, during and post-elections. And then you come down to a few issues. Now, what are these issues that shaped the election, and how did they contribute either to the success or the failure? Shehu, there were things that worked in this election, and we must celebrate those things that work. There were things that didn't work in this election. We must highlight those, express our disappointment with those, but also demand that certain actions are taken. So if you say, what are those things that worked?
Yeah.
This is the first time in Nigeria's election where INEC is producing the ballot papers and the result sheets locally. In all our elections since 2011, our sensitive materials have always been produced outside Nigeria. And the question is, don't we have, the resources and the capacity to produce those materials? This election showed that we can produce, election materials internally. The reason why this was introduced was to address issues about logistics. But the key question is, what if you produced materials locally, did it translate to early opening of polls on election day? And we can come to that. The second thing that worked was that the beavers that INEC deployed for the 2023 election was being deployed for the first time in a national election. And so when it came to accreditation was largely successful, because based on our data at IReV Africa, the beavers did recorded about 97 to 98%, performance rate when it came to accreditation. So accreditation, succeeded. I think the other thing that worked was the enthusiasm, the youth power that we saw demonstrated in the course of the elections. That a lot of young people were interested in getting involved in the process. We also saw citizens' resilience and resistance to all forms of malpractices. Now, what didn't work? And I think this is where we pay a lot of attention. The first thing that didn't work was that despite the reforms that INEC introduced, despite local production of sensitive materials, polling units opened late. And so there were logistical issues that impeded on INEC's ability to open polling units early. And you can look across board, and IReV Africa has shared this data. And the fundamental question is, how come in an election where materials were produced locally, materials were at the state 1 week to the election, how come on the day of the election, in some states, the materials were not deployed to the polling units early? And so it tells you that somewhere, somehow, there was an attempt, and perhaps even successful attempt, to delay opening of polls in some areas across the country.
It's deliberate. Right?
It's deliberate. It's deliberate. And why do we say it's deliberate? INEC took remedial actions. It suspended the resident electoral commissioner for Sokoto. It suspended the resident electoral commissioner for Abia. So across board, you would see, and if you dig deeper, you discover that in some cases, the RECs and some of the EOs went on rampage, undermining the process, making it difficult.
So manipulation of non-compliance with electoral guidance,
and then
manipulation
of election results was also one thing that went wrong. Because one, if you look at Rivers, and IReV Africa was the first, to detect the falsification and the manipulation of results in Rivers and in Imo via the PVT. And we said that in Rivers, that the returning officers and the collation officer had mutilated the results. We said the same thing for Imo just right after INEC declared the results. The other issue was around electoral technology, and in this particular case was IReV, that INEC failed, to deliver on its promise of the electronic transmission.
As a lack of transparency.
And that's a lack of transparency. And tied to that is also the poor communication, on the part of INEC to explain to Nigerians what exactly happened. So these are some of the things that went wrong.
There's still a lot of things, part of what you have identified at IReV, the lessons and the need for the review. Let me bring in Dr. Lekki. I mean, there is this independent review that IReV has done, and now IPAC, this is the conglomeration of political parties, the umbrella body of political parties, saying that there is a need for a post-mortem. It does look to me that since the election finished, INEC has suddenly got mute and just got quiet and silent, radio silent, and we're not hearing anything from INEC From your own understanding of how things work, are there usually a post-mortem, a review of the process, and usually when does this happen?
Thank you, Sharon, for having me on. I'm glad to be part of this discourse and see my friend Todo. Yes, INEC usually will produce what is called an election project plan, an EPP document. That EPP document lays out the architecture of a forthcoming election, including the budget, the deliverables, what is going to happen, who's responsible, and duties are assigned. And so that is the basis for going back to do a comprehensive monitoring, appraisal of what really happened. And so I expect that this will happen. This election took place in February, March. We are now in, we are still in May, going on, to June. So I don't think it is necessarily delayed that this has not happened. There was no need for IPAC, Mr. Sani, to be asking for it now. It's going to happen. It's a matter of routine that INEC will do that. I remember when I was in INEC, I was actually chairman of that planning process for the comprehensive review. The review will take place at different levels of INEC operation, involve multi-stakeholders, the participation, including coalition officers, returning officers. They will all be called to speak to issues of opportunities and strengths and challenges that took place during the election. And usually, such a report will be the basis for INEC making new proposal for the review of the Electoral Act, which, particularly in this case of the Electoral Act 2022, which happened, benefited tremendously for such a review. So the review will come. INEC is not going to run away from it. The time scale, I'm not too sure that it's too late. It's getting too late for us to do that kind of a review.
I mean, if you were still in INEC and you are still chairing that committee, based on what happened in the 2023 election, what do you think would be very pertinent for you to look into?
So a lot of things are pertinent. This election was one of a kind in the sense that there was so much expectation, and INEC itself has gotten a very robust legal framework to be able to do much more than happened, that have happened both in the past and happen currently in terms. So I think the issue really for me is is INEC not able to rise to the challenge, of the opportunity that are presented by the Electoral Act, and also over-promising beyond what it can actually deliver. I think statements were made that should not have been made in terms of rising the expectations of Nigeria legitimately, for that matter. So that will be an issue of how to make sure you manage those kind of expectations, going forward. There was no need to make statements about this is going to happen when I don't have complete control, of some of the variables that are going to challenge those kinds of expectations. And the issue of, I also look at this issue of logistics. Logistics is INEC's biggest problem. And it's good to know that the ballot papers and those kinds of materials are now produced, internally, which is a good thing. But logistics, the biggest factor in logistics is transportation. And INEC has no good control. I don't see when they're going to have a good control. So it's going to be a challenge going forward, because transportation is dependent on people who are providing you with transport services. All these, people owns various union transportation and stuff like that. They are usually, also key players in the election. They also look for elbow room. INEC will contract them. They also go behind INEC and make contract agreement with other opposing parties. I have a clear example. We've paid, and I remember in Bayelsa, transport unions were paid money to bring boats to the beachhead, and they didn't show up after they've collected money. I wanted to dismiss all the NYC to go back, and because we couldn't go into Southern Niger, that it was getting very late. So people are working against the transportation issue. So I don't know how INEC can address that. You sign a contract, you are paid money in advance, you are given the time to show up, and you don't show up. And there is no recourse for that. That's a major issue.
Mr. Lucky, let me put you right on the spot. You are one of the most senior officers in INEC, very senior, you're very close in rank to the INEC chairman when you were in office. But something fundamental was wrong with the IReV, which it was obvious to everyone. If you were in the shoes of the INEC chairman, before now or by now, shouldn't Nigerians be hearing of some fundamental administrative discipline or disciplinary measure on what went wrong if a country is spending up to 305 billion or more on an election day, there was a fundamental failure in the discharge of the promises made. What do you think should be happening in INEC? Because obviously it's not happening.
Well, with regards to the issue of IReV, I think IReV is one of those important opportunities that INEC was able to harvest, from the new electoral act 2022. But INEC, unfortunately, failed to rise to the expectation of the promises that they made with regards to IReV. And what we need to do is not to be necessarily emotional and wanting to go to the guillotine and chop somebody's head. What we need to do is to carefully review what happened. I think INEC failed in not communicating and still not communicating. Perhaps they are working on it, but it's taking too long. This is where the issue of perception is very important to sustain people's interest and support, going forward. What really happened? All those promises that this is going to be even though it is not backed up by, it's not a requirement by the legal framework that INEC must transmit the result live and so on, and that it must be done, and it's not a part of the collation or declaration process. It's not there stated in black and white in the law. But still, this is a promise that was made and which gave a lot of enthusiasm to the youth and many others to have confidence in the process and came out to vote. And now, the process has not been explained. There's severe lack of communication. What really happened? That should be immediately, investigated, and INEC should come through completely and say exactly what happened. That's a matter that is still hanging, that needs to be dealt with, even though it is not a requirement of law, but it has to do with terms of perception and people's key in to want to go forward with any future election and even some remaining elections, including those one coming, the off-season elections at the gubernatorial and state level. So INEC should be doing that. I'm not sure they are not doing that, but they shouldn't be silent about it. This is why the communication is an issue. Need to come up and say exactly what is the laid out procedure. We are going to investigate this and make people know that this was clearly beyond, I don't want to put words or solutions into their minds or heads. What was clearly beyond what you could have done. We need to know what happened, why those promises were not kept, even though there was no law broken in not meeting those particular objectives.
I mean, it does look to me like the case of a failed promise of marriage, because, I mean, a lot of people, and you know how it is when you promise someone marriage and you fail in it. I mean, that's how heartbroken some Nigerians were. I mean, some people will say, like Samson said, there were some successes. But let me come back to Samson just for a moment. Samson, you talked about the things that went wrong. But you have also highlighted at IReV Africa the big lessons. And you have also highlighted the need for a review for this process. What are the big lessons for us?
I think the first big lesson from this election is that reforms, if properly implemented, can deliver credible elections. And what's the case in point? It's this electronic accreditation. If you look at previous elections, there are some states that are notorious for padding turnout figures. But with the introduction of the beavers, it made it difficult, for padding of votes as well as turnout for elections. So that's one, because the beavers did deliver when it came to accreditation. It's just that on electronic transmission of results, there were failures, and those failures really hurt the integrity of the process. The second, big lesson from this election is that technology is not a silver bullet. That we need modern technology to deliver transparent elections. You can have the best of technology. If the humans who are managing this technology are compromised, if they are complicit, then technology will not deliver. The third sort of big lesson is that this waste culture that we have within our governance and electoral system needs to stop. When majority of voters didn't show up to cast their vote, we wasted, as a country, over 200 million ballot papers. And if you put that together, that's billions of naira that have actually gone to waste. And so this is an election, where the level of turnout was way, way low. And we're currently interrogating what was responsible for this. That despite the reforms, despite the enthusiasm, you still recorded this low turnout of voters. But then I think it's also important on the issue about electoral technology and looking at issues that need to be reviewed, that one, INEC needs to explain to Nigerians, why is it that Currently on the IReV, over 9,000 result sheets are yet to be uploaded on the IReV for the presidential elections. Up till now, INEC needs to communicate. And you know, Sheun Channels and Yaga Africa work on the IReV with the IRAD. And we know that in all the elections where IReV has been deployed, we've never recorded 100% uploads of results, because there are places where there are cancellation or where there are no results. But INEC explains. But in this particular instance, INEC is yet to communicate to Nigerians. So I think it's important that part of this review process is beyond the failure or the technological glitch, who is responsible. Nigerians need to know. But Nigerians also need to know what's delaying the upload of the 9,000 results.
Because I need to get Dr. Lekki back so that he can give us his closing thought. You highlighted top 15 issues. If you can go through it in just about 60 seconds or less, these top 15 issues for election review of the 2023 election.
Like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about election, it's a composite of several activities and processes. And for us, these are the 15 issues we think that should be a subject of review.
Without having to dig around, these issues are already there.
So you need to look at the environment, because the election was conducted amidst insecurity, fuel scarcity, as well as the currency redesign. How did that affect the election? You need to look at the legal framework. We also need to look at the voters register, the PVC collection. We need to look at electoral technology, review how the IReV and the Vivas is really central to this election.
I'm of the opinion that we should reduce human contact in our election.
Absolutely. But we also need to look at election logistics management, which we've highlighted, the behavior and action of election officials, because collation officers and returning officers did undermine this election, some of them. You need to look at voter turnout, INEC communication, resource management, voter suppression, the role of the judiciary, political parties and candidates, as well as the media, as well as election support from development partners and election observation. These are 15 issues we feel should be on the front burner of the review.
I think you guys are spot on from some of the issues that you have raised. Let me allow Dr. Lekki to send us out of this issue with your closing thought. Going forward, election is not a kid game right here in our country, and it's a developing democracy that we have on our hands. For you, what is the way forward? Proffering solutions, what should INEC be doing? Because INEC is at the center of it all.
I agree with Samson on those 15, and perhaps there are even more. And I also want to say that these 15 points that he had mentioned are not really new. I mean, if you go back, you have the same issue of low turnout, you have the same issue of logistics, you have the same issue of people being compromised. These are there, and I think we need to go back again and see what can be done to toughen the Electoral Act. And I also believe that we need to be doing something in terms of ensuring that people actually participate in the election. There are a number of countries, and INEC has taken study tour to a number of countries, including Brazil, for example, where it is mandatory that citizens must vote, and they have over 90% turnout. We need to be looking in those directions. You can't expect the country to do well, and yet you don't participate in the process, and you don't come out to vote. It's so much money that is wasted on ballot paper. These papers, ballot paper, they spend billions of naira to produce it, and they're also shredded. And even the shredding of the ballot papers are supervised, and they cost money to shred the papers. Having not been used, they have to still pay again to have them shredded. So there's a lot of issues there that needs to be, looked into. And I think INEC needs to be more communicative. INEC can be very silent. I don't know whether it is an ego issue or whatever. I need to own up and be prompt in communicating to Nigerians about what happened.
The communication has been a total disaster when it comes to how INEC dealt with the 2023 elections. I mean, I'm not sure anybody who is handling over 300 billion worth of business will have such a very terrible and disastrous communication strategy.
Absolutely. I think we need to, and it's still ongoing, we need to come out and do. That's why it's very important that this review is done, and so that it can let Nigerians know. There should be a communication strategy also, and a dissemination of the findings of the review, and once it is completed. Thank you very much.
Dr. Mustapha Lekki, a former INEC National Commissioner, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, because this is very important for building not only our society, but our democracy. Something. Thank you so much.
I think it's important for the public to know that yesterday, INEC inaugurated, you know, an election review committee. So INEC has inaugurated an election review committee, including a second committee on report writing. So officially, INEC has commenced its own internal process of reviewing
which they need the public to be carried along.
So we wait for INEC.
One of the bad communication process.
So we wait for INEC and the committee to unveil what's the scope and the methodology, as well as how the strategy for public engagement, because the public needs to be part of this entire review process.
Thank you so much.